Hello, my name is Jasmine NHD. My performance is entitled Black, White, and Blue. Vivian Thomas exploring the cure for the blue baby syndrome. You must be new here. You and I don't speak to a white person unless he's spoken to. Understood? You're going to count a lot of white people treating you funny here, but if you just stick to doing your job, you'll be just fine. Go on now, boy. I'm Vivian, by the way. Vivian Thomas. I've been working here at the Vanderbilt University lab for a few weeks now. I'm the laboratory assistant for Dr. Alfred Blaylock, but to be honest, that's just a bunch of fancy words to say gender. All I do is take care of those research dogs he's doing his experiments on, sweep a little, and straighten out the lab equipment. All you have to remember for this job is to not break one of those glass speakers or knock over one of the Brunson burners. It's not all bad though. One of Dr. Blaylock's friends, this real nice white man, is teaching me chemistry. His name is Dr. Beard. He saw me reading one of the chemistry books after hours and offered to teach me a little bit. It's real kind of him since I plan to be a physician. I had it all mapped out. I just graduated from Pearl High School in 1929, top of my class. I was about to go to this real fancy school in Tennessee, but you know that doggone bank closed because of the stock market crash of 1930. It had all my money in it. 7 years of carpentry, just gone. Here it is 1931 and it's like I'm starting all over. But as long as I can provide for my wife Clara, everything will be just fine. After I had been working for Dr. Blaylock for a few months, I learned chemistry and biology from Dr. Beard, and I was also learning statistics and anatomy and physiology from reading some books in my downtime. Any books I could get my hands on in that lab, I would read. So I started to notice and understand the things that Dr. Blaylock was working on. One day I asked him a few questions and he was just so surprised by my knowledge and understanding on the subject that he taught me a little bit more. He taught me about some surgical techniques he learned over the years and of course what he was working on, which was the cause of shock research. During the day we started to explore the topic of basic surgical techniques like taking the needle driver and inserting sutures or closing an open wound in a dog. I also was learning from hours and hours of researching on my own about the dogs in the research center, the syndromes that takes place, the vessels, the organs, the veins. This was medical school for me. We started to exchange different ideas on the cause of shock, and in a matter of months, we had the answer. A few years later, Dr. Blaylock got offered a position in Maryland to become the chief of surgery at Johns Hopkins University Sanitarium Lab. Once we got here, he insisted I went with him, so of course I went. So once we got here, Dr. Helen Tosick asked Dr. Blaylock to look into something called the blue baby syndrome. Dr. Helen Tosick is one of the first women pediatric cardiologists at Johns Hopkins. She said she started to notice more and more of the blue baby syndrome in her center, her pediatric center. The blue baby syndrome symptoms would be the baby would have a light tint of blue to their skin. They couldn't breathe as well as they were supposed to, and they weren't growing as fast as expected. She already knew the cause. There was not enough blood flow to the pulmonary artery. She also knew somewhat of a cure. She wanted to make something like a pathway between the heart and the lungs to help create blood flow to help aid the pulmonary artery do its job. She just needed Dr. Blaylock, and of course that meant me too, to figure out the surgical details and how to complete her vision. Starting to find the cure for the blue baby syndrome, we had to start off with replicating the syndrome into one of the research dogs. Of course, since I was busy with my new position of chief of surgery, Vivian pretty much took on the work with the dogs. He must have did that surgery 50 times over, but we still weren't getting anywhere. So one day I asked Vivian, why don't you use a clamp right here on the pulmonary artery, a shunt right here on the pulmonary artery instead of the clamp you're using? Because the clamp he was using was just not doing the job of replicating the tetraephalo into the research dogs. So the next day he used a shunt, and of course my idea worked. We had successfully put the blue baby syndrome into the research dogs. We could tell this because the dogs' gums and tongue were both a light tint of blue. Finding the cure wasn't so easy. First of all, we had to find an artery to do the job. It had to be an artery that brought blood into the body that we could attach to the superior bronchial artery so that it helped aid the pulmonary artery do its job. Vivian started doing the procedure again. I had a lot of chief of surgical duties, so he did the surgery maybe 50, 60 times over and over. He started to make his own tools, made them by hand. I had them manufactured. Of course, that was a little tricky since World War II took most of the scrap metals towards the World War II effort. So in a matter of maybe a year, we had the whole surgical details and the cure for the blue baby syndrome. Now I am responsible for performing this procedure on baby Elaine Saxon, one of our blue babies here at Johns Hopkins. You see, I haven't performed this procedure all the way through but once, but I'm pretty sure with my surgical abilities that I will be able to perform this procedure without a problem. You know, I shouldn't be saying these things, being a woman and all, but have you seen this magazine? There's an article in here about the Blaylock-Taussig operation. My husband Vivian has been working with Dr. Blaylock and Dr. Taussig for years, but he's not once mentioned in this Time magazine. Day in and day out, Vivian was working on putting that blue baby syndrome into them research dogs, but he was working so hard. Some nights he wouldn't come home till 11 o'clock at night because he was working so late. Dr. Blaylock wouldn't even start that procedure without Vivian in the room. Vivian stood over his shoulder, his right shoulder, speaking directions into his ear. This whole Blaylock-Taussig operation wouldn't have happened without Vivian. But where is his name in this Time magazine or the American Weekly newspaper or even Johns Hopkins Medicine magazine? You see, Blaylock and Taussig aren't bad people. It's just, they respect him. They are Vivian's friends. It's just this town, this whole country ain't ready for a smart black man to do something as remarkable in the surgical field. We're just now getting integration in schools because that good man O'Rourke winning the Brown versus Board of Education trial. But you know, Johns Hopkins is still separate. They work on the same dogs, but Dr. Blaylock and Vivian have to go to separate bathrooms. Dr. Blaylock and Dr. Taussig even have these fancy parties with their high and mighty friends while my husband Vivian has to work as a busboy to make a little cash because the hospital isn't paying him the right amount of money. He has to pick up odd jobs just to pay the bills, to keep the lights on. Let me tell you about the recent party they had. It was a gala celebrating Alfred Blaylock. 500 people invited, but my Vivian was not on the guest list. The people at John, because he couldn't enter through the front door. The doctors at Johns Hopkins had it set up so he could watch it from the back. See, the people at Johns Hopkins respect him. He is a teacher and a mentor. But as soon as he walks out of Johns Hopkins, he's no longer that awesome teacher and mentor who helped aid the first surgery on the heart. He's just a black man who can't enter through the front door. There's just no escaping it. I would just like to thank Johns Hopkins for my honorary doctorate. 20 years ago, maybe even 30 when I started working here, I never would have thought that I would have my own portrait hanging in the Johns Hopkins halls. Even though Dr. Blaylock is not here today because he went on to a better place, I know he would have been just as happy as I am in this year, 1971, to have my own portrait. And it's going to be sitting right next to his. Thank you, Johns Hopkins. Thank you, Helen Taussig. See?